Nick Wilson asks, would you rather be stuck on Space Mountain or Pirates of the Caribbean? I mean, really, that's a question between would you rather be stuck on a track in the dark that you can't get off of or down where you just hear yo-ho, Pirate's Life for me on loop. They both seem like a pretty bad thing to get stuck on. I guess I'll go with Pirates because then I could always just like talk to the animatronics and make them my friends. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Disney Q&A. This is the series in which you guys send me all sorts of Disney questions, whether it's about the parks or the movies or the rides and its history, and I try to give you answers to the best of my abilities. We have a bunch of great questions this week, so I'm just going to dive right in. I don't have like two best answers from the last question of the week because I'm filming these back to back before I go on vacation in Disney, but we will return to them in the next episode. So let's just dive right in. Our first question comes from Matt Rappa, and Matt asks, what are your thoughts on the Muppets being added to the Magic Kingdom? So if you haven't heard, Disney announced that they're bringing a Muppet show to Liberty Square in the Magic Kingdom. I feel like those are really the only details. It should be coming soon. It's not like an attraction in a building so much as it seems like it's going to be a show that happens on the second floor of one of the buildings in Liberty Square. I think it's a great idea. I'm super excited. I think this is a really smart, cheap, and easy way to introduce something into a part of the parks that I don't think hasn't gotten a lot of love in a while. And I think the Muppets are a great way to approach something like American history. Obviously, you know, Disney's got sort of a rocky past with how it's going to portray American history. You know, you think of things like Disney's America, the proposed theme park that failed. And the biggest concern people had with that idea was like, how does Disney approach the history of America, which had a lot of touchy topics, in a way that's sort of respectful and doesn't feel like they're just focusing on the positives. And so I feel like there's always somewhat of a weird vibe when you got things like the Hall of Presidents and the American Adventure, because, you know, politics are something that, especially today more than ever, is very divisive. And so I feel like having something like the Muppets, which is going to use humor and does so in a justifiable way because they are puppets and that's sort of what they do, is a great way to approach it. I think it's going to be really funny. I'm excited for it. I don't think it'll be there when I go down next week, but I'm suspecting hopefully by January, when we go on our January trip, it'll be there. So I'm really pumped. Our next question comes from Rima G, and Rima asks, I'm 13 and trying to convince my family to go to Disney World. They have the money, but apparently according to them, it's a bit too childish and I wouldn't enjoy the rides. How can I convince them otherwise? This is an unusual question, right? Because the real question is, how do I convince them I would enjoy the rides? And I think the real simple answer is just tell them you'll enjoy the rides. It's crazy to me that they might not believe you when you say you want to go. Normally, the big concern with parents is that they plan and spend all this money on a Disney trip and you end up not wanting to go. That said, I remember being 13, and you know what? To be completely honest, as much of a Disney fan as I am now and was when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I probably thought I was a little too cool. We just never happened to go during those years, so luckily I didn't have to figure that out the hard way. But I guess I can see where your parents are coming from. That said, you just need to express your interest. You know, I think when it comes to parents and their teenagers' like interests, a lot of the time they think it's a passing thing. And the biggest way to sort of fight against that is to show continued interest. So it might not be sitting them down over one day and trying to convince them that you're a big enough fan of Disney that you want to go, but maybe over the course of a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So they realize, okay, you know what? This isn't just a passing fad. This isn't just him wanting it because we're saying he can't have it. It's because he really wants to go. And then hopefully from there, you know, even offer to help save up some money for the trip. You know, any sign that shows that it's not you just saying you want to go on a whim would probably help. Although that's a tough question, and that's a question that I'm going to sort of use as the fill-in for question of the week this week. What advice would you give Rima's parents for trying to convince them to go to Disney World? You know, something creative. How can we convince them? How can we get Rima to Disney? Let me know in the comments below, and hopefully we could help Rima out. Our next question comes from John Gallagher, and John asks, do you think Disney will ever or should ever add more thrill rides, such as more intense roller coasters? That is a great question, because right now we have a couple of thrill rides, although I think some of the more thrill ride focused fans out there would say not enough. Yet we do have this quote from Walt, and we have this idea from Walt from the past that Disney was supposed to be a place where people old and young could both enjoy it together. And so too many thrill rides, and suddenly that's going to sort of push out the younger guests, the older guests, and people who just don't like thrill rides. So you don't want to have too many. So where's that balance, right? And I think the answer is just making sure each park has a good number. Look at Magic Kingdom right now. They have 7 dwarves. They have Big Thunder Mountain. They have Space Mountain. They've got 3. That's pretty good. Epcot right now, as far as thrill rides goes, has Test Track. I wouldn't call Soarin' a thrill ride. I wouldn't even call Mission Space a thrill ride. It's just a spinning ride. So I think maybe we could get a thrill ride in there. Hollywood Studios has Rock and Roller Coaster Tower of Terror. It's getting Star Wars Land, which is probably going to have a good thrill ride. So I think that's pretty good. And Animal Kingdom has, Expedition Everest. It has Dinosaur, which I think is pretty thrilling. And who knows what we're going to get with Pandora. So I think the balance is good there. I think Epcot could stand to use a little more. I just think it's an idea of not saying, the parks need X amount of thrill rides or roller coasters. I think it's just a matter of saying, okay, for every thrill ride, how many non-thrilling rides are there for other people so that guests of every kind can enjoy the parks. You never want a park to just be a turnoff to somebody because it's too much of one thing. It's all about moderation. Our next question comes from Blake Wood, and Blake asks, have you seen the new solar array at Disney World? Do you think Disney World is going to try to move some renewable projects to help their energy costs? Good question. So I have seen it. I've seen it in person. I've seen it from Google Maps, which is the way you should see it because it's really cool that their new solar array is in the shape of a Mickey head. But yeah, I've seen it. It's really interesting. Do I think they're going to do more of that sort of stuff? I certainly hope so, and I think they would. Disney is known for trying this stuff. This isn't new to them. The whole idea was Disney World was supposed to be Epcot first and foremost. It was supposed to be a city of the future that used all this futuristic technology. And so they got special grants on how they could manage their land so that they could try new and experimental things without having to worry about too much red tape. Now, today, a solar field is nothing special. I think that's something we've seen a lot of. But, back in the day when they were doing Epcot and they put all of those solar panels on top of the Universe of Energy to partially power the ride, that was pretty innovative. They also had a pretty impressive energy plant on property. And even though they never used it, they actually had the provisions within Reedy Creek Improvement District to set up a nuclear power plant if they wanted to. They never did. But that was a sort of forward thinking they were putting forth back in the 70s, was they wanted to be on the cutting edge of energy technology. I think today more than ever, it looks good from a company perspective to be green and to be thinking about renewable energy. So I think it's good from a political standpoint for them. I think from an operations standpoint, it's great. The more renewable energy that they can set up, the cheaper it is for them to maintain some of these attractions and their infrastructure. I think it's just a matter of finding the space, which they have got plenty of in Disney World, and making sure it's a priority. Because again, a new solar array in Disney might help with their costs in the long run. It might look good for their PR, but it's not going to have a direct impact on the money they're making daily. Nobody's coming to Disney because they have a Mickey Mouse shaped solar panel farm, right? So my biggest concern is things would get slowed down on that level where they say, well, do we need it? Is this going to draw in guests? And if the answer is no, they might push things back, especially while they're, sort of cutting their budget a little bit, which we'll talk about in the next question. Hopefully, whoever takes over as CEO in a couple of years has a pretty forward-thinking view of energy, and we see more projects like this. And our final question this week comes from Silent Thief. Silent asks, I was at Disney last week, and I went to the Magic Kingdom for extra magic hours and realized that a lot of rides closed during that time. As I was leaving, I saw that both monorails were closed too. I asked my friend, who is a ride operator at Disney, about it, and she said it was due to budget cuts. I was wondering, how could Disney need budget cuts if they make millions just from releasing one movie, not to mention the millions of people that go to the parks? I really like this question, because I think a lot of people look at Disney in a very similar manner, especially when you hear news about them, re-theming a ride instead of building a new one or taking away something like a parade. I feel like the excuse is, well, they're making so much money on Star Wars and Marvel and they've got all this money. Why aren't they just using that money? And I think this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how Disney works. Disney is it is a corporation. It is not just one company. It is many companies. You have the Walt Disney Parks and Resorts, you have their Lucasfilm now, and you have Walt Disney Animation Studios and Pixar. These are all separate companies, and the idea is they all fold under the Disney umbrella, but as separate companies, they all have their own operating budgets. They all have to make money so that they're contributing to the overall, growth of the company. And so even though Star Wars can do amazing in the box office, that doesn't necessarily mean that money that they make is going to just get put into a giant pile that somebody over at the parks can take and use to keep the monorails running when they shouldn't. Essentially, for the health of the company, and this sort of stands for any corporations that have a lot of subsidiaries, is you want them all to be healthy on their own, so that in the event that revenue from maybe their movie division doesn't do so well one year, that doesn't put any of the parks at risk. And so as a result, Disney's making a ton of money when they put out a movie, but that doesn't necessarily mean the parks get to use that money. Now, on top of that, you have to remember that making a lot of money doesn't mean they're making a lot of profit. Think of something like Star Wars. I forget the exact box office, but it's a ton of money. But then you have to consider that they had to pay for that movie. That movie was hundreds of millions of dollars. They had to market that movie. And typically in film, marketing can almost and sometimes, surpass the actual budget of the film itself. So there are some movies out there that, will cost $100 million to make and actually cost $100 million to market. So that has to make extra. You have to realize that when a movie makes $1 billion, not all of that $1 billion is going back to the company. The movie theater takes some of it, and there are all these other partners involved. So, when you work all those details out, it doesn't always work out to the company make a lot of money. In fact, this is unfortunately too common in Hollywood, but most studios, or I should say most movies within a studio, are somehow considered losers. It's called the Hollywood accounting. It's really complicated. It could be a whole other topic for another time. I suggest looking it up if you're interested. Hollywood accounting is just the practice of sort of moving things around so it always looks like the movie's lost money. And you also have to consider, Star Wars made a ton of money, but think back to something like John Carter of Mars, didn't make a ton of money. And so they lost money there. And so some of that money from Star Wars has to pay off some of that loss from John Carter. And so it's never a one-to-one sort of thing where they make $1 billion and they have $1 billion in their pocket and that Disney gets to use $1 billion. And it's unfortunate because, you do think of something like Disney where they're, really healthy and doing well. And then you wonder why it doesn't translate to all the companies that they have. And it's just sort of the way it goes. And you can see that they have that mentality through things like Disney Interactive, right? Disney Interactive was one of their branches that just wasn't doing well. And so rather than taking any of the profits from, their television, their film, their parks, and moving it in there to support it, they just shut it down because it wasn't working well. Now, that's unfortunate from a consumer standpoint because you lose out on things. But from a company standpoint, it does kind of make sense. It's a pretty smart business move. It's just like one of those things where you wish the real world didn't work that way, but it did. Anyway, I think that could be a whole topic for a whole other video at a different time. It's just how the Disney company is structured and how that means they work with each other. And just as a small aside, as an example, I remember reading this in a couple of Disney books, but just because they're all owned by the same company doesn't mean they can use everything for free. In fact, if the parks, for instance, wanted to use the Star Wars theme song, the score, in a ride, they might actually have to pay Lucasfilm for the rights for that. Even though they have the same owner, you think everything would be shared. It just doesn't work that way because it's part of the business. They have to sort of make sure that's all accounted for. Anyway, that was a great question. In fact, there were a lot of great questions this week. I want to thank you all for them. If you have a question you'd like to leave for the show, just leave it in the comments below, or you can let me know on Twitter. I'm at Rob Plays. If you want more Disney videos, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I do 3 a week. I want to thank you all for watching. Whatever you're doing this week, make the most of it because it makes it that much better. And I hope to see you all next time for the Disney Q&A. Bye, everybody. I would love to share a little bit of advice that I have as somebody who's planned a couple of group trips now to Disney World on how to make it a more enjoyable experience, both in the planning stages and in the vacation stages.